Auditor-General Tsakani Maluleke has for the first time used her expanded powers to issue a certificate of debt that makes a municipal manager personally liable for millions of rands in losses. Maluleke described the certificate, which was issued a month ago, as a milestone for her office as she seeks to increase consequence management for stewards of public finances. It is holding the accounting officer and municipal manager of Ngaka Modiri Molema Municipality, Allan Losaba, personally liable to repay 4.6 million rand. The municipality in the northwest includes the town of Mahikeng. Now, for more, we are joined by Professor Alex van den Heever, who's a governance expert at Wits University. Prof, a very good evening to you. Now, a certificate of debt sounds fantastic when one thinks of the state of our municipalities and the lack of consequence management. Why don't we see more of these?
Well, the first issue to ask is, why do we see this at all? And part of the reason why we see it is because there are such fundamental conflicts of interest between, in many cases, the political parties in the legislatures and the people they've placed into the administrations. And what that means is that when you have irregular expenditure and unauthorized expenditure, the legislatures do nothing. The senior management does nothing. And this extends also to coalition governments where the coalition parties have clearly become part of this. And so there is just inaction. There is nothing done. So if you looked at the Gauteng government, you go back in the key departments for 12, 13 years, and you will see systemic levels of irregular expenditure that are not addressed at all. So the Auditor General keeps identifying them, and it's plain to see for anybody who's not blind, deaf, dumb, and stupid what's going on. And yet absolutely nothing is done. There is no consequence management, no effective remedial action, and the only time anything is done is if there's a faction fight between one part of, say, the ANC and another part of the ANC, or one coalition partner and another. We don't see people who are really holding people to account for looking after government's funds. So out of desperation, AXA was given these additional powers. And they've exercised this. But this is for about 4 million rand, where we are dealing with billions and billions of rands every year. So essentially, this is the first shot above the bows. You know, it's a first attempt to take some action that harms the people who are harming South Africa. But it is nowhere near enough. And it is, there's a question as to whether this will ultimately be implemented. But if we took it forward, this could be done to the current Premier of Gauteng. It can be done to the Mayor of Johannesburg. It can be done to the Mayor of Tshwane. It can be done to everybody because they're all sitting on piles and piles of illegal actions by their departments for which they take no action. So essentially, we've got to get government to be accountable again, but we have to also make sure that the political actors, the dirty ones, don't get in power anymore because they are part of the problem.
And going back to your initial question, say, why don't we see them at all, and that explanation that you gave, is that safe to say that, I mean, while the Auditor General does have these powers and seems that she has a little bit more teeth when it comes to them, that it's still reliant on politics?
It can be, because it's still relying on quite a lot of people to still act, because you're still going to have to enforce this particular decision. And if it's not properly enforced, then you have to take further action. And this is in relation to an amount of 4 million rand. Now, so last year, we would have had in the Gauteng Department of Health, maybe around about 3-4 billion rands worth of irregular expenditure, which has been ongoing annually for years, including the Tembisa matter. And yet nobody has been held accountable. It's important to note that the Public Finance Management Act and the Municipal Finance Management Act contain massive penalties that must be applied, and yet nobody applies them. So those are all laws where there are severe penalties for essentially willful non-compliance with that act, as well as gross incompetence, as requirements for both civil and criminal penalties, and yet they're never applied. So the issue is this is a relatively small intervention but it is a penalty and it is something that can be taken forward. But we have to ask the question, why is the Public Finance Management Act, why is the Municipal Finance Management Act not complied with and not enforced from all levels of government? And there is an answer to that. It's not an open-ended question. It's very clear why. It is that the accountability structures have been shut down because of the conflicts of interest between the political actors at all levels of government and the administrations, as we are seeing now in the Mandlanga Commission, where we see how it operates, where the people who are stealing from the state bribe officials, bribe politicians, bribe policemen. And that becomes the problem that we've got to deal with. We have to ask the question, why is an entire legal framework completely inert? And it can't continue like this. Otherwise, we're living in a lawless state if we continue like this.
Yeah, and when we consider the regulations that are already in place, the acts that are already in place, the massive penalties that are already supposed to be instituted anyway that aren't being done so, should one be celebrating the certificate of debt that has been issued, thinking about that 4 million rand in comparison to the 2 billion rand at Tembisa Hospital, the COVID PPE corruption and the everyday corruption that cost the country billions of rands? It's a drop in the ocean.
It is a drop in the ocean. It's useful, but we mustn't pretend that that is actually the beginning of accountability in South Africa. It's good that AXA did this. But we essentially have to make sure that the entire machinery of our accountability frameworks are operationalized. Our only problem at the moment is that the actors that are responsible in many cases for taking these things forward are hugely compromised. And until we address that and look at that very seriously, that includes looking at the people who've been elected into power. You cannot elect criminals into government and expect them not to behave like criminals. We have to change who is in charge of government, who is in the legislature, who is in the executive as well. But that's part of the picture. But unless we start changing things fundamentally in the way our government is run, a few pinpricks here and there are not going to make a substantial difference.
And before I let you go, Prof, as you're talking about changing who's in power as well, when one thinks about the government of national unity, the ANC and the DA getting together as well, where has that left our opposition currently in our politics? When we think about the Public Finance Management Act that you could speak of as well, that's also just being ignored, the Auditor-General's recommendations constantly being ignored as well. One would think that this is where the opposition has a role to play.
So at the moment, the official opposition was what the whole Zondo Commission was about. I'm not sure that those are the guys that are going to hold anybody to account. They still have to be put in jail. So they form part of the problem because they've apparently been given a sort of a light touch accountability sort of response from government following the Zondo Commission report. And one has to answer, government has to answer a lot of questions around the failure to take forward the Zondo Commission findings and prosecuting people all the way through to the top. So the other issue that we do have to understand is that in a proportional representation system, you don't necessarily end up with an official opposition that you will have in the case of the British system, which doesn't work like ours. There you will have a kind of a monopoly winner for a period. And so you'll have a single party that's in opposition and that's in power, and the two will basically kind of hold each other to account. In a proportional representation system, it is actually the diversity of actors that holds everybody to account and stabilizes things. So it disperses power. It prevents any one group from being completely in power. What we have to make sure is that we've got people in government who are not crooks. And that's a very difficult thing at the moment because a lot of them have got into power by stealing from the state. That's actually been the way political competition has operated in large parts of South Africa, is that the extraction of resources has actually been used to further people's political careers, and that gets them into positions of power, which allows them then to control the resources of the state. That is a systemic problem, and we can't look at politics as normal when we've got that dynamic. So when we ask the question, why does the Public Finance Management Act not get applied? Why does the Municipal Finance Management Act not get applied? It is largely because the people who are in positions of power are not prepared to take those forward because they will basically be a turkey voting for Christmas.
Prof, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for your insights this evening.